A team of linguists at a place like Cambridge, experts who deconstruct languages and make ancient texts give up their secrets. Now, imagine this team turns its attention to the national language of the Philippines, Filipino. Their initial hypothesis seems simple. They figure they're about to analyze a straightforward Creole, a linguistic souvenir from centuries of Spanish rule and a dose of American influence. The plan? Categorize the borrowed words from Spanish and English, map the influences, and file it away as another classic example of colonial language blending. They expected to find a language with Spanish bones and an English skin stretched over a simple local frame. The scholars prepared their usual tools: comparative linguistics, etymological databases, all the fancy software. They were confident, methodical, and completely, utterly unprepared. They thought they were setting out to map a shallow river, a predictable little tributary of the big established language families. What they were about to find wasn't a river, but a deep, complex ocean of linguistic history, full of structures that would completely shatter their assumptions. Their first academic reports would soon be filled with notes of pure astonishment. The simple blend of Spanish and English they were looking for, it just wasn't there. In its place was something far more ancient, intricate, and infinitely more fascinating. The first reports coming from our imaginary field team would have likely been dismissed as mistakes. The computer models designed to trace a language's parentage were spitting out results that made absolutely no sense. When fed the core vocabulary of Filipino, the basic words for life, family, nature, and thought, the programs couldn't find a major link to Spanish or any other European root. The very foundation of the language was something else entirely. It was ancient, it was widespread, and it had zero connection to Europe. The scholars had made their first big mistake. They looked at the surface, the thousands of borrowed Spanish nouns for things like tables and days of the week, and mistook the decorations for the architecture. They assumed it was a colonial construct. The data screamed back that they were real. The real story of Filipino didn't start with Spanish galleons in the 16th century. It started thousands of years earlier, with seafaring people who undertook one of the most incredible migrations in human history. This was the team's first shock. Filipino wasn't a child of Spain. It was a direct descendant of the great Austronesian language family. For our Cambridge team, this was a paradigm shift. Austronesian. The word itself conjures images of vast oceans and scattered islands. It's a language family stretching from Madagascar off the coast of Africa through Indonesia and Malaysia all the way to Easter Island in the Pacific. And the Philippines is right at the heart of this ancient web. The scholars realized the language they were studying, Filipino, the national language based on Tagalog, was part of one of the world's largest language families, not by number of speakers, but by its incredible geographic spread. This discovery changed everything. The colonial structure of Filipino, its very way of seeing the world, wasn't built on the logic of Latin, but on a foundation laid down 4,000 years ago. Suddenly, they weren't dealing with a few centuries of colonial history. They were dealing with millennia of indigenous development. The words for mother, ina, father, ama, child, anak, house, bahay, water, tubig, and sky, langit. These were Spanish loanwords. They were echoes of a shared past, words that have relatives in languages spoken thousands of miles away, from Malay to Malagasy. The team started tracing this lineage. They learned how, around 5,000 years ago, seafaring people from Taiwan began migrating south, reaching the Philippines and spreading out from there. They brought their language, Proto-Austronesian, which became the ancestor of hundreds of modern languages. This meant Filipino is, in its soul, more closely related to Indonesian than Malaysian, than to Spanish or English. It's a sibling, not an adopted child. This also explained the existence of Baybayin, a pre-colonial script used long before the Spanish arrived, proving that the people of the islands had a rich, literate civilization. Of course, the loan words from Spanish and English are still there, making up a huge part of the vocabulary. But the team now saw them for what they were. Not the foundation, but layers of paint on a much older, stronger wall. It was like studying a mountain and only noticing the trees on its slopes, completely missing the massive geological formation underneath. The words for modern technology, government, and religion might have come from the West, but the words for the soul of the culture, family bonds, and the natural world were profoundly, unshakably Austronesian. The team had to scrap their entire initial hypothesis. Their simple study had just become a journey into one of the world's most significant linguistic families. If the Austronesian roots were a shock, the grammar was a series of intellectual earthquakes. Western linguistics is built around the subject-verb-object SVO sentence. The boy ate the apple. It's the default, the assumed normal. The Cambridge teen, steeped in this tradition, was baffled to find that Filipino doesn't just ignore this. It often prefers a verb-subject-object VSO structure. Kumain ang bata ng bansanas. Onto the boy and This wasn't just a quirky option. It was the most natural, common way to speak. To the scholars, it felt like reading music where the melody comes first, then the musician, then the instrument. It required a complete rewiring of their linguistic brains. But that was just the beginning. The VSO structure was only the gateway to a far more elegant system that linguists have debated for decades. The Filipino focus system. The team discovered that focus is a feature that makes Filipino incredibly precise and flexible in ways English can only dream of. It's a system where the verb itself changes its form, using a complex set of prefixes, infixes, and suffixes to signal which part of the sentence is the main topic. This goes way beyond the simple active and passive voice. Let's imagine the scholars in their lab, puzzling over a simple event. A man wrote a letter for his friend with a pen. In English, you can say it that way, focus on the man, or make it passive. The letter was written by the man. Focus on the letter. It gets clunky if you want to focus on the pen or the friend. Now imagine them analyzing the Filipino equivalents using the word sulat, right? They'd find a stunning menu of natural cover options. Actor focus, focus on the doer. Sumulatan lalaki ng lihap. The verb uses the infix to say they, the man, is the important part here. Object focus, focus on the object. Sinulat ng lalaki ang liham. The verb uses the infix, pointing directly at the letter. The letter is what we're talking about. Beneficiary focus, focus on who it's for. Sinulatan ng lalaki ng liham ang kaibigan niya. The suffix flags the friend as the topic. The sentence is now about the friend. Instrument focus, focus on the tune. Ipinansulat ng lalaki. Ang panulat. The prefix ipinan shines a spotlight on the pen. The whole sentence is framed around the pen. The scholars were floored. This wasn't just different word order, it was a completely different way of encoding information into the verb itself. Filipino doesn't just have active and passive, it has a whole suite of voices. The verb acts like a director, pointing the listener's attention exactly where it needs to go. One researcher might have noted that in some ways, this system made Filipino's syntax more nuanced than Latin. This system, a hallmark of Philippine-type languages, allows for a level of precision that often requires whole extra clauses in English. It was a masterclass in linguistic engineering that completely shattered their idea of what a simple language could be. Humbled by the language's ancient origins and its mind-bending grammar, the scholars turned to the vocabulary. Here they found thousands of familiar loanwords: mesa, table; silla, chair from Spanish; computer, teacher from English; But they soon realized this was just the top layer of a massive treasure chest. The real shock came from the words that had no direct translation, the words that are windows straight into the Filipino psyche. They would have stumbled upon kilig. They tried to define it with words like giddiness or butterflies, but none capture that specific, thrilling rush of romantic excitement. Your league isn't just the feeling, it's the whole social event. The shiver when you see your crush, the blush, the giddy laughter with friends about it later. It's a cultural concept packed into one word. Then came gigging. How could one word describe the overwhelming urge to squeeze something unbearably cute, like a baby's cheeks or a puppy? It's that mix of affection and playful aggression that every Filipino instantly understands, but takes a full sentence to explain in English. And the deeper they looked, the more of these cultural gems they found. They'd find tampo, which describes a specific kind of sulking or withdrawing affection from a loved one after being hurt. It's not anger or sadness. It's a quiet, relational protest rooted in the expectation that the other person should know what they did wrong and fix it. They also found words that spoke of a communal spirit, like bayanihan, the tradition of a community coming together to help one of its own, famously symbolized by neighbors literally carrying a family's house to a new spot. They would also be fascinated by the sheer number of linguistic layers beyond just Spanish and English. They found traces of Sanskrit from early trade in words like dukkha, poverty, and guru, teacher. They found words from Malay and from Chinese dialects like Hokkien, which gave words for food, business, and family, like sushi, ki, and ikaw, earrings. The team realized Filipino wasn't a simple hybrid. It's more like a sapin, a Filipino dessert of many colorful, distinct layers. Its base is Austronesian, but it has been masterfully enriched by centuries of contact with India, China, Malaysia, Spain, and America. This wasn't a language corrupted by foreign influence. It was a language with a remarkable genius for absorbing new concepts and weaving them into its own unique, powerful fabric. Next, our team would get into the mechanics of how the language is built. Here, too, their assumptions were useless. They discovered a system of word building that was incredibly efficient and poetic. Thus the sounds. They note the importance of the kie sound, which can start a word like in ngayon, now, a nightmare for many English speakers. They'd also have to master the glotting stop, that little catch in your throat in In Filipino, that invisible sound can completely change a word's meaning. For example, basa can mean to read, but basa with a glotty stop at the end means let. It's a language where stress is crucial. While not tonal like Chinese, Filipino is a stress-timed language, where changing the emphasis can create a whole new word. But the real magic was in its morphology. Filipino is a highly agglutinative language. This means instead of using lots of separate words, it glues prefixes, suffixes, and infixes onto a single root word to create a whole universe of meaning. Let's go back to the root word sulat, right? From this one root, the speaker can instantly generate sulat, to write, sinulat, wrote. When was written is the focus. Magsusulat, will write, manunulat, a writer, panulat, a writing instrument, sulatan, a place to write on, or to write to someone, kasulatan, a written agreement, pakisulat, please write, makapagsulat, to be able to write. And that's just a small sample. From a single root, Filipino can sprout dozens of precise, nuanced words, where English says, the person who is a professional writer, Filipino just says, ang manunulat. They'd also notice reduplication, where repeating part of a word is a grammatical rule. Repeating the first syllable often signals the future tense. Sulat becomes susunat, will write. While repeating the whole word can show intensity or frequency. Araw is day. Araw, is everyday. To the Cambridge scholars, it was like a set of linguistic Legos. With a limited number of roots and a toolbox of affixes, you could build a nearly infinite variety of precise meanings. At this point, the research would go beyond technicals and into how a language shapes the way its speakers think. What they'd find in Filipino is a fascinating duality, a cognitive blend that mirrors the Philippines' unique spot between Asia and the West. Many Western languages, like English, favor an analytical, linear style of thought. Many Asian languages, in contrast, are described as more holistic and contextual. Filipino, they discovered, doesn't pick a side, it does both. The influence of Western analytical thought is clear, but its Austronesian core reveals a deeply holistic worldview. The best example is that focus system, the ability to frame the same event from multiple perspectives. The actors, the objects, the beneficiaries, suggests a way of thinking that is relation and situation. The right way to say something depends entirely on the context and what's important to the people talking. This links directly to a core Filipino cultural value, pakikiramdam. It's another untranslatable word, loosely meaning a deep, shared, inner perception. It's the ability to sense another person's feelings without them being spelled out. A language this sensitive to context is the perfect vehicle for a culture that values pakikiramdam. You don't have to spell everything out. The grammar itself guides the listener, assuming a shared understanding. You see this in how pronouns are often dropped. In English, ate is an incomplete sentence. In Filipino, kumain na, ate already, is a perfectly complete thought, because the who is understood from the situation. The team would conclude that Filipino reflects a mind that is both analytical and relational. It can be direct, but it excels at subtlety. This cognitive duality isn't a contradiction, it's the language's secret weapon. It's a language that encodes not just information, but relationships. For the scholars, this was the final piece of the puzzle. The complexity of Filipino wasn't just in its grammar, it was in the sophisticated way it modeled the world. So our imaginary Cambridge project, which began with a simple, almost dismissive idea, would have concluded with profound academic respect. The notion of Filipino as a simple mix of Spanish and English would be tossed aside, an example of intellectual underestimation. In its place would be the portrait of a true linguistic powerhouse. What would have shocked our scholars wasn't that Filipino has foreign influences, but that its indigenous foundation is so robust, its structure so sophisticated, and its cultural depth so immense. They'd have learned that a language isn't just words, but a worldview. The Filipino language is a living archive of the Filipino people's journey, a story of ancient migrations, cultural resilience, and a unique way of thinking. It's not a simple hybrid, it's a sophisticated system that has masterfully absorbed outside influences to enrich its own powerful Austronesian core. The complexity of Filipino isn't a bug, it's its most glorious feature. What are your favorite shocking features of the Filipino language, or any language you know? Is there a word in Filipino that you feel perfectly captures a piece of the culture? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this look into the hidden complexities of language, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories that challenge what we think we know.